Welcome to Indus Special. This is Ejaz Haider. Much has been talked about India's 5th August move to annex occupied Jammu and Kashmir, but it is little understood that what happened on that fateful day is crucial for the advancement of Project Hindutva, helmed by Narendra Modi. Yes, he happens to be the Prime Minister of India. Bharatiya Janata Party was begotten from the fascist womb of Rashtriya Swayam Sevak Sangh, the RSS. Modi, who leads the BJP, was an RSS apparatchik, or in Sangh terminology, a pracharik. The provenance and the ideology of RSS have been definitively chronicled and analyzed by eminent Indian jurist and writer A.G. Noorani in a recently published book, RSS, A Menace for India. Noorani says the RSS is a fascist, deceitful, and communal organization. In a pre-book launch interview to Huffington Post, Noorani said, and I quote, "Look, this is the party which floated the Vishwa Hindu Parishad in 1964, the Jan Sangh in 1951, and the BJP in 1980. You see, people say, let it become a conservative and non-communal party. You can't do that. You can't ask the Pope to become Protestant. This is their philosophy and outlook," unquote. Noorani opens the book with these lines. What is at stake is not only the Indian dream, what is at stake is the soul of India. Those who understand Kashmir and what has happened now know this as a central fact. They also know that this is not Pakistani propaganda. Here's what an eminent Kashmiri scholar said before the US Congress in her testimony. Natasha Cole is neither Pakistani nor Muslim. But as a Kashmiri Pandit, here are her views.
RSS has avowedly an idea of turning India into a Hindu nation. It also has this idea of an undivided India where everything else in the region will become a part of a Hindu India. The people who speak about Kashmiri self-interest and the rights of Kashmiris themselves are the ones who are most vulnerable from any and every side. I also want to say that every other day for Kashmiris is a commemoration of a massacre. Kashmir is one of the first interstate disputes that the UN was prominently involved in. And there are several resolutions in those early years that the UN was actually trying under various people to demilitarize, under Norton, under Dixon, under Menzies. This is a long and complex history, but that complexity should not blind us to the should not obfuscate from us the very simple fact that there is a political problem here, which is compounded by human rights violations, and the international community has a role because this has not just implications for Kashmiris who are currently under siege and under collective punishment, being deprived of their very basic rights, but it also has regional and potentially global implications. The question here is really not so much about Article 370. The fundamental question here is about the consent of the people. If something is being carried out for people's welfare, for their development, then why does it need tens of thousands of troops being brought in? Why does it have to happen overnight without absolutely any consultation of the people, with placing even the pro-India politicians in prison and then depriving the population of the right to say anything?
That was Dr. Natasha Cole. Modi and his cohorts are defrauding the entire world, whether it's the economy, where many sectors are tanking, or the claim to democracy and rule of law. Ghar wapsi, love jihad, cow vigilantism, mob violence are daily occurrences. And yet, peaceful Kashmiris have been banned from protesting in front of the Indian High Commission in London. And the US Assistant Secretary of State for South and Central Asian Affairs, Alice Wells, calls the revocation a little bit of a canard. Her words. Contrast the Indian actions with Pakistan's quest for peace and amity. Pakistan's offer to India to open the Kartarpur Sahib corridor is a testimony to that. Before we return to occupied Jammu and Kashmir, let's recap the cussedness shown by India with reference to Kartarpur and how we got to the signing of an agreement on it earlier today. We are joined for both these discussions by Essa Naqvi, who's our correspondent and was on the ground in Kartarpur. We shall also hopefully be joined shortly by Dr. Mohammad Faisal, who's the spokesperson for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We are also going to talk to Muzzammil Thakur, a Kashmiri analyst, writer, activist based in London, but joins us from Islamabad. Special thanks to Muzzammil, and also welcome to Pakistan, Muzzammil. I will get back to you shortly. Let me just go to Essa first. Essa, Dr. Faisal, talking to the media, said these were very, very difficult and tough negotiations. And he used the word very, very difficult and tough negotiations. We know that India was not particularly interested in this, but it got under pressure from its own Sikh community after Pakistan made this offer. What was the environment there today, earlier, when you were there and when the signing was happening?
Like I can tell you that I was there when this whole idea was conceived, and then this promise was made by Prime Minister Imran Khan. At that time, I can tell you that nobody could believe that this could actually materialize on ground. The area that used to be frequented by some 100 yatris on average days is now going to host about 5,000 yatris from across the border. The facility, its infrastructure is unbelievable because it has been turned into the largest Gurdwara in the world now. And especially after 28th of November, when this groundbreaking ceremony took place and Prime Minister Imran Khan inaugurated that construction work. After that, so many incidents have happened that anybody, like I cover the Pakistan-India relations, and while sitting in Islamabad, I never thought that this actually is going to make
But Essa, can you please clarify? You said it's been turned into the largest Gurdwara in the world. I'm assuming that that has been done by the Pakistani state's funds?
Yes, exactly. That the Pakistan is bearing all the construction cost of the corridor on the Pakistani side, and obviously the Indian side, which is a smaller part. Obviously, that doesn't have that doesn't include the construction of the compound, which is adjacent to the Gurdwara, and the road leading to Gurdwara, and the bridge itself, and the immigration terminal and the other facilities. All of that has been constructed by Pakistan, and that is precisely why Pakistan actually insisted for this $20 service fee, which was for the operational expenditures. And basically, Indian objection to it was countered by Dr. Faisal today, when that it is not even 1/3 of the actual expenditure that Pakistan is going to do for actually operationalizing this and day-to-day expenditures that have to be incurred by the government of Pakistan for letting the Sikh yatris in such a big number to come to this place for their pilgrimage to this holy site. But I was just telling you that after 28th of November, when this project started, like such things, the Pulwama incident, the way Pakistan and India have had differences over the India trying to push Pakistan from grey list to blacklist, the skirmishes that we've seen unprecedented on the line of control at the working boundary over the past 1 year, and then annexation of Kashmir on 5th of August. Obviously, all these were the incidents that were considered also as bottlenecks in actualization of this this project. But today we have seen that on the Pakistani side, the media that was such like in such a big number, and that like obviously we have seen on the line of control as well. Some days ago, Pakistan took foreign media and local media to the line of control, where actually Indian Army chief had claimed of having actually hit some terror launch pads, but nothing could be found on ground as such. But today we've seen that this agreement has finally been signed, and from 9th of November, this area, this place, Gurdwara, Kartarpur Sahib, is going to host about 5,000 Sikh yatris and other, not just Sikhs. It's not just
this will be 7 days a week. It's a big responsibility that Pakistan has taken. And essentially what you're saying is that despite India's belligerence, despite India's aggression against Pakistan earlier in February, and then across the line of control, which is a daily occurrence, unfortunately, the shelling and firing, Pakistan was quietly doing this, trying its very best to somehow make this work. Thank you, Essa Naqvi, for your insights. I'm also joined, as I said, by Dr. Mohammad Faisal, who is not only the Director General, South Asia and SAARC, but also the official spokesperson for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Dr. Faisal, thank you for being there, and special congratulations to you. As you said, these were very, very difficult and tough negotiations, and you were, fronting these negotiations from the Pakistani side. You finally signed this. Despite everything that has happened since we first made this offer, is this not a testimony to the fact that Pakistan wants peace and amity in the region?
It definitely is, but it is much more than that. When we went there last year in November, there was one Gurdwara and fields and nothing else. No road, nothing. And in 1 year, I come back after 11 months, and it is a transformed place. The earliest estimates we got from many private developers were for 3 to 5 years to develop the project. And FWO did it in 11 months with the support of the government institutions. So wherever we put our mind to it, we are able to do it. So the nation needs to really gear up and convince itself that we can do things which are miraculous. I am dealing with it. I am telling you that even international developers it is mind-boggling for them. How could we do it? The land development and everything. The peace part is the separate part. Because in the last 11 months, we passed through Pulwama, we passed through 5th August, as you rightly mentioned. We had many ups and downs. Trump Saab was initially not happy with us, and then he became happy with us, and the Prime Minister Saab went to Washington, D.C., then to New York, met Trump Saab twice. So the political ups and downs were immense in the last year. Despite all that, we went through 3 rounds of negotiations. Difficult negotiations, and finally we were able to sign it today. It incorporates almost all the inputs that we had made from the very beginning, and we had told the Indians then also that our contentions are not political, they are based on principles and facts. And we wouldn't be able
Absolutely.
to really,
Faisal, that's a very important point, and I think that's the point that needs to be communicated through the social media also and through all fora available, that Pakistan made this offer not for any political gains. India actually was very custard initially, and they got into it very reluctantly. Very quickly, before I wrap this up, give us a sense of, that entire first 3 months after we made the offer, they actually got after Sidhu, but then they came around because there was this sense that their own Sikh community was not particularly happy with Delhi's response. So I think a bit of recap on that is also important.
entirely agree. At another time, I would have been more cautious and more diplomatic. But the main problem now is the leadership in India, because it has boxed India into such a corner that it is very difficult to wriggle out of it. And the extremist tendencies rising in India are horrifying even for the Indians. And as you very rightly said, Sidhu was targeted. Subsequently, even they backed out of 10 2 ministers. Then they said that the ministers were private with to Kartarpur Sahib, the Union Minister and Minister of State, who had participated as official representatives of the Indian. So there's a lot of back and forth in their policy, because the prudence and the wisdom of earlier Indian leaders is not there anymore.
Is not there anymore. That's an unfair fact. Thank you so much. That was Dr. Mohammad Faisal speaking with us. Let me go to Muzzammil Thakur. Muzzammil, there are lots of issues on the table. But let's begin with the fact that it's not just in India that the Kashmiris are not allowed to voice their grievances. But Her Majesty's government has decided that the protesters cannot protest in front of the Indian High Commission in London. How do you look at that? I mean, being a Londoner yourself.
It's completely unfortunate that the government have banned the procession towards the Indian High Commission, considering that this has been a regular occurrence for more than 20 years, even 30 years, some would say. It's recognized as Black Day. It's recognized as a day that India infiltrated and occupied Kashmir. And it is not just within the United Kingdom. It is recognized all over the world. Media houses, foreign institutes, think tanks, NGOs, grassroots organizations, everybody gets involved on this day. It just happens that Diwali falls on the same day. Not that our procession and our protest falls on the same day as Diwali. So this is something that's very important. The way that the Indian media and the Indian organizations inside the United Kingdom have lobbied is on the back of the 5th of August, as well as the 15th of September protests, or the 5th of September protests that happened, and small skirmishes that had happened, eggs that were thrown at the embassy, and they called them violent protests, without even understanding what Indians are doing inside Kashmir. But that said, there still will be a procession going on, a protest outside the Houses of Parliament in Downing Street. I'm sure that the people of London, particularly the Kashmiri, the Azad Kashmiri and the Pakistani diaspora, will make sure that it is peaceful, but we also have to remember that the Indians regularly instigate the people that are protesting for Kashmir.
Okay, Muzzammil, stay with me. I'm also joined by Mr. Arun Kumar, who's an economist, joins me from Delhi. Mr. Kumar, we were talking about the state of the Indian economy, because independent economists have been saying that the Indian economy's state is not as good. And I remember having you on my program a few weeks ago, and you basically agreed with that. But there is also the issue of this rising extremism. Now, if this downslide continues, how would the government actually focus on the economy? Because then there's going to be a lot of social unrest, and the two things don't go together.
So, political perceptions are usually quite different from economic perceptions. And we've seen that in the past, even though the economy was not doing well, but we had the government win the elections by record high, majority. So political perceptions are not necessarily linked to economic perceptions. It's really a political matter. So, if you look at the economy is doing quite badly for the last 3 years, after demonetization and then GST, and then, you have had the crisis in the banking sector, which has resulted in the fact that, a lot of credit is not available to a lot of small scale and cottage sectors. So, the unemployment has also risen. You've had a situation where, the various parameters from the economy show that it's not doing well. The budget is not getting as much resources as it should get. So the fiscal deficit is tending to rise.
Muzzammil, you heard Mr. Kumar, he said that political perceptions are different from the economic reality. Now, but I'm assuming that at some point, if unemployment stays as it is, if the growth figures come down, then it's going to begin to bite. And when it does, then there's likely to be the political perceptions and the economic reality are going to be, sort of come together and become one.
You would think that in a normal democracy, that's exactly what happens. India is not a normal democracy. India is Hindu India. Let's remember that it's a Hindu India, a Rashtriya, an organization that is running India that wants a pan-Hindu nation that alienates and criminalizes anybody that disagrees with that. And I know that this may be coming off slightly different to what the economy is and how the people will react, but you have to remember that the way that the Indian government is currently working, particularly the BJP backed by the RSS, is that their ideology of what an Indian is and what nationalism is supporting the BJP and the RSS. And if you do not support them, then you are anti-national. If you talk against the BJP, you are anti-national. If you talk in favor of minorities and Dalits and Muslims and Sikhs, you are anti-national. So that said, the minorities and those that are under the poverty line and those that would theoretically want to vote in the future, they are going to be pushed to maintain the sanctity, so-called sanctity of the BJP being in power, because that in itself is what they would consider to be nationalism. So the hell with your economy, the hell with your pockets, the hell with your families. As long as you support the BJP, you are an Indian. And nationalism in India is on the rise, and it is unnaturally on the rise. And unfortunately, as your fellow guest had said, that economics and political perceptions sometimes are separated, and one trumps the other, unfortunately. And in the case of India, nationalism always wins, Hindu nationalism.
Muzzammil, tell me, the Pakistani government decided after this entire Indian propaganda about hitting the so-called terrorist launch pads in the Neelam Valley. They said, okay, let's go to the ground. And they offered the diplomats to come along, including diplomats from the Indian High Commission. Of course, the Indian High Commission chose to not go along with that delegation, but there were other diplomats who did go there. Do you think that was a smart thing to do?
It was a masterstroke. At least this way, they've been able to expose the Indian false narratives that are being propelled all over the world. We've seen exactly what Natasha Kaul has said inside the US Congress hearing, and now we've also seen the diplomats coming to the ground, literally the ground, not saying in Islamabad. They went down to the locations that the firings had happened, and they witnessed exactly firsthand what exactly the consequences of that firing was. And it's not just about the fact that India fired and that, there was no terrorist camps to be found, but they've also seen that there are civilians living in those locations. So this amounts to further war crimes. It is taking away, not just necessarily taking away from the war crimes that are happening in Kashmir, but it's adding to the narrative that India is a war criminal. India commit war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, and even ethnic cleansing. And that may be necessarily towards Kashmir, but now we're seeing that they're attacking sovereign countries, namely Pakistan, and in areas where there are civilian populations. No terrorist training camps, not even the army. Simply civilians, and not even wealthy civilians. These are people that are villagers, farmers, living on the line of control, people living on the mountains. So thankfully, the international community now have evidence, first-hand reporting, that the narrative that India is peddling to the international world is completely false.
Okay. There's also, there's going to be this attempt to take food and rations across the line of control into occupied Kashmir. What do you think of that? I mean, I don't think they would be allowed to cross the line of control.
It's an interesting question because the permission exists on the Azad Kashmir side from the Pakistani government that yes, you are free to travel across the line of control into your fellow part of Kashmir, into your countrymen, to go and deliver aid to your family and your relatives and your friends and your cousins and your fellow nation. But the problem is always going to be from the Indian side. They will never open that door. They will never allow the people to meet. I mean, this was in the old days, we called these CBMs, Conference Building Measures, where people from either side of Kashmir would meet and greet, and families would be able to meet each other after many, many years. Some had never seen each other before. But at least this way, we are showing the international world that even humanitarian aid is not being allowed to cross into the line of into Indian-occupied Kashmir, even though that Pakistan is permitting it. Even the government officials will be with us, there will be civilians with us, trying to cross, trying to deliver aid, not completely non-political, completely non-confrontational, simply to deliver aid. And however, we know what the Indian narrative is always going to be. They are going to try and say that this is Pakistani sponsored. They are going to say that they are going to send terrorists over. We don't trust the food items. There's going to be poison in there and explosives. Again, completely false. A recognized international organization, an NGO in the United Kingdom and in Pakistan, could not possibly have any other intention than to deliver aid and humanitarian relief to those people that are living under brutal occupation inside occupied Kashmir.
Absolutely. Thank you. It was Muzzammil Thakur speaking with us. Before I wrap up, Mr. Kumar, you're right in saying that political perceptions and economic realities are different. But if it begins to bite, I mean, given the unemployment figures, and if the growth doesn't pick up, then there will be large numbers that will not be added into the workplace and the market. So at some point, the political perception and the economic reality is likely to get linked up.
Well, that's possible. But you cannot predict when that would happen because, as we can see in the last 3 years, the rate of growth of the economy has been negative. It's not really 5 or 7%, and the reason is that the unorganized sector, which employs 94% of the workforce, that has been hit badly, and there has been a lot of loss of employment, a lot of loss of incomes, and that's why the organized sector rate of growth is also beginning to fall in the last 1 year. So it's been happening for 3 years, and yet the political perception is that, there is the nation in danger, and that you need a strong leader, and the opposition is quite decimated, and the opposition continues to lose out further. So the people feel that there is no alternative, So this perception has been created that there is no alternative, and therefore the people have to stick to this kind of a, regime. And that is what has happened in the last few years. It can continue. New issues can be raised in terms of, what needs to be done, etc. So that, this political perception, you can keep creating that, and keep, seeing that the economic perceptions don't come up to the fore. So, it can be quite a while.
I hear you, Mr. Kumar. One last question, a quick question and a quick response. As an academic, as an intellectual, are you personally concerned about the extremist streak that seems to be getting into the body politic?
So, there is a global trend of right-wing drift, whether it be in US or Germany, etc. And there are reasons for that. So in India, there are specific reasons and there are global reasons. What has happened is that, in all these cases, migration has created a big issue, whether it be in Germany or it be in America or it be, in Britain, etc. And that's why you've seen Mr. Trump come up, Brexit take place, Angela Merkel beginning to lose. In France, you've had Le Pen rise. So there's an entire right-wing drift. And that is because globalization has left a lot of people unemployed, a lot of inequality rising, and that's what you see in India as well. So there is a rightward drift in the Indian economy, in the Indian society.
So it does seem that those factors impact political perceptions. But thank you so much. That was Arun Kumar talking to us from Delhi. We shall take a short break and return to discuss China's role in organizing an intra-Afghan peace dialogue. Stay with us. Welcome back to Indus Special. China is organizing talks among Afghanistan's rival factions as part of efforts to end years of war after negotiations between the Taliban and the United States on the withdrawal of US forces broke down. Afghan officials said that China, which shares a short border with Afghanistan, has been trying to encourage peace efforts, and last month a Taliban delegation visited Beijing for talks with government officials. China has invited a delegation to participate in the intra-Afghan dialogue. This was said by Sohail Shaheen, the Qatar-based spokesperson for the Taliban, and he actually tweeted this late on Tuesday. And the intra-Afghan dialogue is aimed at reconciliation between Afghanistan's warring parties and has been running parallel to the talks between the insurgents and the United States. What exactly is happening is what we shall discuss, and for that we are joined by Rahimullah Yusufzai, the resident editor of the news based in Peshawar, Professor Cheng Xizhong, who's a professor at Southwest University and teaches political science and law. He was also the Chinese defense attaché in Pakistan about 20 years ago. And we also have Ejaz Malikzada, who's a researcher and external relations officer for Afghan Institute for Strategic Studies. Let me quickly go to Mr. Yusufzai. Mr. Yusufzai, China has been doing this. I remember you have been going to Beijing for these conferences, and so China has been involved in this for a long time. What exactly is different this time, or is this just a continuation of the previous efforts?
I think it's much deeper involvement by China, because now they are hosting intra-Afghan dialogue. Earlier, they were supporting all the peace initiatives. They were part of the the four-country committee, Pakistan, Afghanistan, China, and the US, which tried to, bring peace in Afghanistan and failed. And, China has been supporting all the other initiatives. This time, they are becoming directly involved in a bigger way, that they will be the host. They will be trying to reconcile the warring Afghan factions, and they will be playing host to this meeting in Beijing. So Russia was doing it earlier. Now China is doing it as well, which shows that China, has that goodwill among all the Taliban factions that it can organize such a meeting. And I think, this will be welcome. We have to see whether, Taliban will agree to a high-level Afghan government delegation, because I heard Suhail Shaheen saying that the representation from the Afghan government will be low level, and secondly, that these officials will come in their personal capacity, not representing the government. So we have to look into that, because the Afghan government officials are saying they have certain, standards and certain, benchmarks which they will try to follow. But I think China may have already worked this out. China must have spoken to both sides before announcing the conference. So this is a new initiative, but, it is different than, say, the ones which are being organized by European countries, because those were part and they were coordinated with the U.S., but this one is not really coordinated with the U.S., I believe.
Okay, so tell me, the deal that was broke down essentially after a Taliban attack in Kabul, which killed a U.S. Soldier, and Trump walked back from that. That was essentially for the withdrawal of the U.S. forces. And then in the second phase, it was supposed to lead to some kind of intra-Afghan dialogue. Now, that particular deal so far is not on the table, while Russia, China, even Pakistan are trying to get some kind of dialogue going. Is it an issue of too many cooks spoiling the broth, or are these efforts at some point, at some stage, linked up?
Primarily, the U.S. was supposed to initiate all this. And when they were holding talks with the Taliban, there were a lot of expectations. But then because the U.S. pulled out of the talks, we saw that the second stage and the inter-Afghan dialogue and the possibility of ceasefire, that all that was put on hold. Now, I think, Russia and China, they are very keen, because of their neighborhood, that there should be peace in Afghanistan. And they think that, by holding such conferences, maybe they will set the ball rolling, and they will put pressure also on the U.S. and all the other stakeholders. Okay. That they must, resume this dialogue. Otherwise, it will lead to nowhere.
Okay. Stay with me, Mr. Yusufzai. Let me go to Professor Xizhong. Professor, how do you look at China's role here? I mean, as I said earlier, China has been interested in a resolution of the issue. China would also want the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. But how much time and energy is China prepared to invest now that it wants to host this intra-Afghan dialogue?
First of all, I would like to say that the wars and the civil strikes in Afghanistan have lasted for decades. And this is the result of the invasions and the interference of external forces. The Afghanistan war, launched by the United States in 2001, has not only failed to solve the problem of terrorism, but also made the South Asia region, especially Afghanistan and Pakistan, suffer from the war. Afghanistan and Pakistan are the biggest victims of Afghanistan war launched by the United States. China firmly supports Afghan-led and Afghan-owned inclusive peace and reconciliation process, and supports dialogues among all the parties in Afghanistan, including the Afghan government and the Afghan Taliban. China is willing to facilitate and help the process of peace and reconciliation in Afghanistan on the basis of respecting the wishes of all Afghan parties. I think on the issue of the peace process of Afghanistan, Pakistan has been playing very, very important role.
Okay. Pakistan has to play a very important role. Let me hop over to Ejaz Malikzada in Kabul. Ejaz, thank you for being on the program. Tell me, how do you look at this particular initiative from China?
Well, thank you, Mr. Haider. I appreciate your call. First of all, let me correct you on the issue of warring parties, China bringing warring parties. Actually, China is not bringing warring parties. China is bringing Taliban to face individuals, as Taliban say that people who will meet from Afghanistan will be only meeting them in their personal capacity. Well, I don't think these talks will have any effect in the peace process. These efforts, it's just Taliban meeting people in personal capacity. It's just another Taliban and Pakistan and China effort to give the Taliban diplomatic
Okay, that's a very interesting observation, Ejaz. Tell me, what do you think would be an effective strategy? Since you're saying that this will not have any effect, what is it that you think will have some effect in terms of, a deal, bringing violence down, and some kind of intra-Afghan dialogue?
Well, we first need to start, the Taliban first need to start talking with the Afghan government. The Taliban are meeting only individuals. They do not want to meet the Afghan government. So our Chinese fellow here said that they support Afghan-owned, Afghan-led peace process. But this is not an Afghan-owned, Afghan-led process. Until we do not have Afghan government, elected Afghan government on the table, it's not an Afghan-owned, Afghan-led process. So
okay, that was okay. Hold on. So that was something that the Taliban have been saying all along, even when Khalilzad was speaking with them. The thing was that if that agreement had actually been signed, then the next phase would have been an intra-Afghan dialogue. But that agreement fell through; it never got signed. So there are these efforts, as you said, by Islamabad also, by Beijing, by Moscow, to somehow try and bring the Taliban and various other Afghan stakeholders together. Surely they should yield some fruit, no?
Well, I do agree that these talks can pave the way for intra-Afghan talks. But as per my information from the advisor of Afghan State Minister for Peace, last week in the Herat Security Dialogue, he said that the initial agreement that the Taliban had with the U.S. was on the release of 2 abducted American university lecturers. But Mullah Baradar was not. They agreed to release those 2 American and Australian lecturers abducted by Taliban. But Mullah Baradar later came out and said that he was not authorized to release them. So that's also another question. Are the Taliban or the Qatar representatives able to negotiate on behalf of the Taliban? Because we have 5 different Taliban groups, the Taliban on the ground, the Taliban in Qatar, the Taliban of Mullah Baradar, also the Taliban of Mullah Umar's son, and then we have the Taliban of Mullah Hibatullah. These are different splinters. We could say splinters, but these are different perspectives.
Okay, that's again an interesting thought. Let me take this to Rahimullah Yusufzai. Rahimullah Saab, are these splinter groups? We thought that the Taliban was speaking with one voice.
The problem is that, there was going to be a prisoner swap. One has taken place already. Indian engineers were released, and in return, 11 Taliban leaders were released on the agreement of the Americans. Wherever they were being held, but they were released because the Americans wanted this. Now, the second swap was going to be for these 2, professors from the American University in Kabul, one American and the other Australian. The American is very old and he's not in good health. But the Taliban are demanding the release of Anas Haqqani, the brother of the leader of the, Haqqani network, Sirajuddin Haqqani, who also happens to be the deputy leader of the Taliban nowadays. And apart from them, there are other important prisoners. One is a maternal uncle of Anas Haqqani, Haji Malik Khan. So that has not yet taken place. It's not that Biradar made a promise and he could not deliver. I think they want these important Taliban prisoners to be released because these two foreigners are also in their eyes very important. I think the test of the, pudding is in the eating, the taste actually. So we'll see because if there are factions, with the Taliban, we knew that this is not really, a party or this is a movement and many different people have joined it. But the Americans wanted the level of the Taliban delegation to be raised. That's why they asked Pakistan to release Mullah Biradar and to include more Shura members in the Taliban delegation. And that was done. Now, half the Shura members, half the Rahbari Shura members of Taliban movement are in Qatar already, and they are part of the negotiating team. And, we also have to remember that when Taliban declared a ceasefire last year, it was strictly observed.
It was strictly observed, which gives us a sense that they speak with one voice. This is all for tonight from Indus Special. Thank you so much to Rahimullah Yusufzai, Professor Cheng Xizhong, and Ejaz Malikzada. We shall see you tomorrow at the same time. Meanwhile, for latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news. Good night and goodbye.